Cool. Some of you have seen me talk about this at school before. Don't worry, it's not the same thing. I have updated the memes. So this is best practices for public game demos. Really what I'm trying to say there is just demoing at events like conventions or festivals. If you do a private game demo within your company, it's still the same thing as just the wording there. Brief introduction about myself so you kind of know the angle that I'm coming from on this topic. I've done some collaborations with companies in the area, making Adventure Time Game Wizard with Cartoon Network Games, and Pixel Press, Hive Jump with Graphite Lab. As far as my personal work, though, and some other personal contracting, I like doing a lot of physical space kinds of projects. And those kind of put a different spin beyond just putting a game on a screen and working your demo around that. When you have something that involves people having to walk up or interact and play with something, you learn some different lessons there. And there's some crossover. And that's what I'm hoping to bring to some of these details. I think the beginning of any good perspective on how to demo games is to actually go to events. A couple that I've been to, just to look around, not as an active, demoing game developer. Events like PAX or IndieCade or the Midwest Gaming Classic. Sometimes just being an observer is important because as a demoer, you need to empathize with them and figure out if I were in their shoes, what is drawing them to my booth. I think that if you don't take some time to look at other people's demos and ask yourself, why is this interesting to me? You won't really develop a perspective of how to show your own game. So you kind of need to play both sides there. As far as events that I've actually shown at, of course, PixelPop is coming up. I hope that anyone who's working on the game is going to be showing there this month. That's kind of our big one locally. But there are other events like TEDx, help show stuff at E3, GDC, even Warped Tour and the Pulitzer Arts Foundation. And the big takeaway from this is you learn a lot of different lessons. Showing at a museum is very different from guerrilla marketing at GDC, where you're kind of just pulling your demo out of your backpack when you can get someone to listen, compared to showing something at Warped Tour, where you're outside and it's really hot and you're competing with really loud music. These are all different experiences. And one of the big things to take away from this is that by going to a lot of events, expertise is not necessarily knowing everything. The more events you do, the more you develop a feeling that, well, by age 35, you should realize you actually don't know anything. And so the more events I go to, the more I realize, wow, I was doing it wrong the whole time. And I just add more and more of that stuff to how I'm demoing or how I ask other people to demo, and hopefully it gets better every time. So as far as this general topic of demoing games, it's a lot like game design, or any kind of design, UX design even, UI design. It's less of an exact prescription. Parts of this will be, yeah, you need 1, 2, and 3. But if you think that a good demo is filling out a checklist and just running with it, you're probably going to be surprised and run into some unfortunate mistakes or even emergencies in the middle of your demo. And so it's more like game design in the sense that you create pressure. You create pressure that brings people in, just like game design encourages you to, or encourages player to have certain behaviors. And you create pressures to either push people away. Sometimes someone's not a good audience member for your demo. And a big part of demoing well is accepting that I'm not going to sell my game to this person, and I should focus on someone who is a better prospect. And so you're shepherding people through an experience. You're not just filling out a checkbox. And so from this perspective, I've assembled several mindsets that you can use, different perspectives you can think through to ask yourself, do you have all your bases covered for your demo? Or are you ready to react to something that might happen while demoing your game at a public event? The first perspective I want to talk about, and I'd rather talk about this first than end with this one, because this can be a really tough one, is the perspective of self-care and harassment. Even if you love demoing games or making games and it never feels like work and it feels like the most fun thing in the world, it really is work. And you should respect it from that perspective. If you think about something that's fun, like, I don't know, I really love eating sushi. So when I think about, okay, I'm going to go eat sushi today, I don't really think through what are all the things that could go wrong. I just kind of go and do it, and that's what fun usually is. You might think demoing games is like that, but it's going to take some work. You should consider certain things. It's also like QA. A lot of people think, oh, you're a quality assurance tester? That must be the most fun thing in the world because you get to play games all day. But it's not. It is work. And so the big thing to do is stay in touch with your psychological state. A lot of us, especially if you are really invested in the success of your game, you want every interaction to be a win. And it can feel bad when someone walks away and they were uninterested in your game. You know, that's a rejection there. And we all know what rejection feels like. It's okay to not always be at peak social. There will be moments where you're not on top of the world and you feel a little tired and you wish the event was almost over. A lot of us are introverts, and so this is us very much being underwater, holding our breath as long as we can to get through the event. And so it's okay to retract a bit sometimes. It helps even more if you have someone to help you, someone to switch out while you go take a break or get a breath of fresh air. I have seen some friends who were super introverted and they were just super gung-ho about showing the game they were really excited about, but they wanted to do it alone. And in some cases, I've seen those friends have anxiety attacks in the middle of a 1 or 2 day event. And they should have asked for help. Luckily, in the case that I'm thinking of, I was there to help lend support. But it happens. Like any prolonged activity, PixelPop is 2 days, PAX, Penny Arcade Expo, that's 4 days. GDC is 5, I think the show floor is only 3, so some of these can be a whole week-long event. You have to pace yourself. It's very easy to burn yourself out in the first day, psychologically or even physically. You just talk so much that you lose your voice. Doesn't matter how excited you are, if your body gives out, you will not be able to function. And so it's a matter of learning your pacing, learning your personal limits. I remember, I think the very first PixelPop, I wanted to show about 3 or 4 games. I broke one of those the night before. So we only showed animations of parts of that game, and then a lot of other stuff was fixed at the last minute. Don't try to do too much at once. And then the last one, harassment. It's no secret in our industry. I mean, there's a new news article every week about some kind of harassment happening. And it's not just these distant things that happen in California or New York where there's a large population. It happens here too. And so whether it's the leadership of the co-op or the leadership of PixelPop Festival, these are things we're actively talking about. Like as recently as yesterday, I've had conversations of us talking about, okay, well, something happened a year ago or 2 years ago. What can we do better to help avoid those situations? And part of what I want to share with you from the perspective of this talk is try to avoid being so insular about your booth. Like there's a lot going on at your booth. It's a lot of work just to run your own thing. But keep an eye on your friends, keep an eye on your neighbors. You will get constructive criticism, but there is a line where someone, is saying something, attacking a developer or saying something that otherwise shouldn't be. And don't be afraid to support your neighboring exhibitors. Don't be afraid to tell a visitor that, hey, what you're saying is inappropriate, and I would like you to leave my booth right now. A lot of talks about how to do good exhibiting is obsessed with the customer is always right. How do we make our visitor happy? But in our industry, there is a line that can be crossed with how people treat you in the public, where you should feel comfortable saying, no, that's not acceptable here, and not acceptable at this event. And as far as the co-op, seek out the leadership if that ever happens at an event. If it happens at PixelPop, Carol or Mary are the leadership there, along with any volunteers that you can talk to about that stuff. It happens. I don't want to sugarcoat it and act like, public events are always perfect and people are always nice. So let's talk about more perspectives. There are going to be a lot of 3s in this one. First of all, why would you even want to exhibit? First part of this, the first intent, is for informational or marketing purposes. And so, of course, you're going to want to prepare a pitch. There are tons of talks and articles about this. That's not what I'm going to go into. I'll talk about it a little bit throughout the thing, but this idea of, what are all the ways you can have a great pitch? Hours of YouTube videos, tons of books. about pitching your idea, your business, whatever you're making. What you're also going to need is memorable gameplay. Sometimes we forget, especially when you're deep into making your game and all the little details that go into it, that you really just need to show an excerpt for your, for your exhibit, for your booth. It's the same for game jams also. When you get 3 to 5 minutes to present your game, yet I've seen so many groups focus on the story stuff that happens 20 minutes into your game. And that's not what you're going to get to usually in a demo setting. So focus on the memorable parts. Branding and gameplay. This is an interesting one I'm seeing indies be a bit more aggressive with, especially in demo spaces, is you have all this material, you have your brand at the beginning, the name of the game, maybe your company name, you've got all this stuff on the table spread, but what if someone who's really into your game, or there's a really interesting part of your game, and they take a picture, like 3 minutes into the experience? Not a lot of us think to put something at that point to help remind them, what game was this? I've got dozens of pictures from conventions where I took a picture of a game, can't remember what game it is. And so during an exhibit or a public demo, consider just keeping your logo in the corner. Because if they only see the logo at the beginning and they take a picture later, they're not going to catch it. These are probably the big three, I think, because it is about the game, and it's about reminding them what to do next. Other materials that you might have, of course, signage, flyers with more details, business cards for quick little tidbits of info and contact information, and also a website. And these kind of, these go to varying degrees of detail. These are varying levels of engagement. Some people, they just want to look at the poster and then they kind of keep it in their head. Other people want to do a deep dive of research into, is this a legit game that's coming out? Do I actually want to pre-order? And so you want your website to be convincing. So this is the first intent, informational or marketing. Other one, play testing is super important. And so there's a lot going on. You're interacting with people. Being social is hard, but it can help to have someone just helping keep track of bugs. This can happen in two angles too. You can actually outright engage someone, ask them for feedback. Sometimes you just might silently observe. Try both. You can alternate, try both. It can be really hard to read someone and figure out, is this the kind of person where I'm going to get better feedback by talking to them, or should I kind of let them trudge through the swamp of how my game is at that point in time and see how well they do? It is possible to A/B test. It can be risky. There are certain degrees that you can do this. You can prepare multiple builds at once and just go to the demo those and just switch between them at certain times. Probably helpful to keep track. If your developer is demoing with you, you can actually do some live A/B testing and actually change the game in between demos. There have been some PixelPop festivals where we were able to fit in maybe 50 variations of our game. Sounds cool because we were getting a lot of feedback. Really, it's reflective. That's just how many bugs we had at the time. But we were fixing them that fast to get that much more feedback. And so the A/B refers to here's version A, here's version B. We're going to test both of them, compare them, see which works better, and just iterate from there. You can iterate during your demo if you're equipped with the right people, and if you're comfortable with it. A lot of people, demoing is super stressful. You don't want to be tweaking your game while you're demoing. So I mentioned listening for feedback. Sometimes just silently watch. And the big thing is, what people say isn't always the fix that's correct. I've heard people say, wow, this laser is too weak, or this enemy is too hard, when really it was something else that needed to be tweaked. Maybe it was the health instead. Maybe they had wandered into somewhere they shouldn't have been yet in the game, and so we needed to fix the progression of the level. And so listen to their feedback, but they're not in charge. And it's important to understand that one. Third intent is networking. Sometimes the biggest thing that makes an impact on your experience is to go and meet other exhibitors. And I'm super guilty of this one. I get so focused on helping to run our booth that I forget to say hi to all these awesome people who are visiting from out of town, or old friends I haven't seen for a while, to actually check in on how their games are doing. And so meet them, because they can be a great resource of feedback because they have a game design perspective that normal convention goers don't. And so they'll notice other things about your game. They might have the connections that get you into other exhibits or other conventions. And so coordinate with them. One of the cool things that I saw happening in Anime St. Louis this year was that even though there were about 4 or 5 game developers in a kind of a relatively close area, and you kind of get in this mindset, it's a bit of a tunnel vision because you're so focused on doing your game demos properly that you try to interest the person they played and then you say goodbye. And the cool thing that started happening was we started realizing, hey, this person might like my friend's game. And so we would start reading, hey, you like RPGs, you should also try my friend's game over here. And so kind of like this diagram here, IKEA, it's like a dungeon, they don't want you to leave. And so one section always pushes you to another section. We started juggling visitors to each other's games. And that kind of created this feedback loop where we got a lot more engagement than if we had just been working in our own silos. And so team up with other exhibitors. Complementary games are nice. It's like, oh, you like sci-fi? Here's another sci-fi game. And just route visitors to each other. If you're friendly enough, even competing games. Like, why not say, hey, this game is just like my game. Maybe you like that one more or less, but still you're helping a fellow game developer. It's free advertising. The street goes both ways. You can develop a pretty good relationship there. Many conventions, festivals have satellite events or parties. Whether these are for people who just for other reasons, like if an event is exclusive or too packed, or for some reason someone can't do the whole event, there's usually a lot of other stuff going on where you can meet even more people, network even more, or have another chance to demo your game again. And so look for those. And so these are 3 intents, 3 general reasons why you might want to demo your game. And these are not entirely exhaustive, and there's some overlap, but 3 big mindsets to cater to and make sure you don't forget. It's really easy to just focus on number 1, for example. But you're not the only one with an agenda. Your visitors have intents of their own. So 3 intents of theirs. And these escalate. So the most detached one, they're uninterested. They're just casually passing by. Or maybe they're just passively enjoying that your game is there. And they're really there for something else. This can go 2 directions. You can bait them in with interesting or general content, whether that's handing out flyers, engaging them in conversation, or just pointing to your game and say, hey, look at this game, look at this gameplay, look at this video. This is a big topic in itself. Interesting thing, if you've ever done sales, a lot of what they teach you is eye contact, direct questions, try to, depending on the environment, trying to avoid open-ended questions or trying to get quick yes or no. It depends. I've heard advice to both directions. At Anime STL, that didn't work. The moment I looked someone in the eyes, and I guess it's just a very shy crowd, they'd look down and kind of wander away. Like they were just really embarrassed that I made eye contact with them. So you kind of have to read the crowd. It doesn't always work. But the goal is to escalate, to bring them in. But if they are one of those people that, they're just not going to be interested in your game, it's okay to disengage. The worst thing you can do, even if it feels like this event is going to go on for hours, and like if it's 3 days, so that's 8 times, so that's 24 hours worth of demoing, if it's 3 full work days, the worst you can do is waste a lot of time with someone who is just either faking it or their eyes have glossed over. Just accept it. They're not into your game. Next step up, though. This is someone who is active or otherwise engaged. Hook them in with more details. I'm going to actually give a breakdown in a couple slides of how details can kind of layer in a game. Let's say, hey, do you like this Zelda-like style game? Here are some details about it that might interest you. For example, maybe it has co-op, maybe it's a sci-fi game. If it looks like that, they kind of want to watch, but they don't want to be any more involved, again, it's okay to disengage. Rejection can happen at any level. You kind of want to engage as much as you can, but respect their freedom to walk away. And this is kind of where this is a little hard to see the eye on reconsider. This is where harassment can actually go both ways. I went to, it wasn't Taste of St. Louis, it was Saucy Soiree last year. It's like this big convention floor where a bunch of restaurants are giving out food samples. And so one of the restaurants that I felt really uncomfortable visiting was this guy was really aggressive with this step. Is they're giving out food samples, which is an intimate thing already to go to a booth and put something in your mouth. Like that's a big deal. To trust that someone's not going to poison you, especially if you have a food allergy. Like that's a big deal to cross that boundary. And so this guy walks up, hands me the food, and I say thank you. He immediately pulls some flyers and shoves them in the front pocket of my shirt. And that was really uncomfortable to violate that personal space. And so harassment can happen both ways. Don't do that. Respect someone's right to distance. But compared to the previous slide, instead of just disengaging, back one more, you're going to disengage, but you already knew they were actively interested before. So give them a chance to reconsider. If they say they're too busy to play your game, for whatever reason, doesn't matter if they're too busy, that's what they said, ask them to come back later. Or if they're uncomfortable playing a multiplayer game with other people, because that can be anxiety-inducing, tell them where they can find more videos or more information. Give them a chance to escalate later on their own terms. The third level is like complete engagement. The would you like to know more JPEG meme. This one where someone, they love the game, they're telling you how much they love the game, maybe they're saying, I'm so happy that something like this is being made. And so you want to finalize informing them. From the angle that they are interested in, give them as much information as they are willing to take. But again, sometimes people get really attached and they want to be really buddy-buddy. Maybe they will become your best friend later on. But you're here to show off games. So it's okay, again, to disengage at that point. But leave them with a call to action. Is pre-order our game, or follow us for more news. Or come back again and play later to explore other levels that you didn't get to try. So these are the 3 intents. If you have a background in sales or marketing, this is known as the marketing funnel, or a lot of different variations of some kind of funnel. And so you start with the broadest audience possible, all these people who are somewhat engaged, and you slowly escalate that interaction to find the people who are most engaged. And it's kind of lined out by the screen bezel here, but this has qualified out. So these are people who, for whatever reason, have dropped out at that point. Hopefully you have still served them to the extent that you could as far as promoting your game. This next 3 topic is known as the 3 reads. I first heard about this from Gage. You might know him as Helvetica on Twitter. He made really bad chess, among a lot of other interesting games. And so his 3 reads stem from design. And so the first read is what pulls you in. So here we have a flyer. You see, it's like, okay, I love David Bowie. Or maybe you hate David Bowie because something's wrong with you. Either way, you've made a decision at this point to self-select whether you will enter that funnel or leave. That's the first read. Second read adds in key details. It's like, okay, this is a performance at this date. Now I can actually start to figure out in my head, am I available at that time? Could I be available at that place? If the answer is no, again, you're going to choose to leave the funnel, or you're going to go further. And the third read, look at the details. Now I can actually start planning. How am I going to get to the venue? Do I want to pay that much money for this? So 3 reads, really quick, very powerful kind of design. It's too easy sometimes to ignore white space or sizing in the way we present things. And so you should be thinking in 3 levels of presentation in terms of talking to people. Because if I actually sat here and someone walked up to me and I started reading this from top to bottom, number 1, I don't know whether they have 5 seconds or 5 minutes. The first read can be read in an instant. This could probably be discussed. Do you want to go? What are our plans of how to get there? And so by allowing people to engage at different tiers, you can actually get more overall involvement, even if everyone doesn't go to the full details. Let's apply this to games. Into the Breach. Anyone played it? Check it out, it's really cool. So at first read, I can at least assume parts of the genre. I like the art style. The layout looks somewhat strategic, reminiscent of maybe chess or other strategy games. Very quickly, I can determine I like this genre. If I'm assuming the genre correctly, I'm interested, I want to know more. Second read, certain key details about how the game plays. Now I understand that it's a turn-based game. There's some kind of concept of power, energy. There are rounds. Tiles actually matter, as well as classes of characters here. Again, I make the further decision. Am I interested in checking this out more? Or have I realized this is not a game for me? And then the third read, looking even closer, now I know not only is this a game in a genre I like, but it has a depth to it that I'm really excited to play. And so, even though you would normally just walk up and see this screenshot in the first place, the sizing, the placement, the graphics all emphasize themselves in different ways that lend themselves to 3 tiers of reading. And so even if you as an artist had a singular intent in the way you designed or made your game is accessible to differing levels of interest. And so these are the 3 reads. The most general, what pulls you in, then you follow up with key details, and then you give the context, deeper context into what's actually going on. And so you're going to see these pop in some of the other mindsets. So the next 3-piece mindset are the 3 distances. So this is a booth I helped run at the Penny Arcade Expo showing Adventure Time Game Wizard. And so the first distance naturally is about as far as you can get. If someone is so far that there's just no way for them to physically see what's going on, you're just going to have to hope that they eventually will come into range, unless you've got other people out promoting. But once they see your booth, you have a lot of options at your disposal. This booth costed Cartoon Network 5 figures to make, and I know not everyone has that, so this is a bit of a stretch. They basically built what probably costed a small, very small shed or house here, so that this 2-floor high thin face could be staring out across the convention floor, and people would say, oh, I love Adventure Time, I wonder what's over there. But height is an advantage. And so consider putting things, even like a poster board as tall as that whiteboard over there, could be advantageous. And so you just want to find ways to draw people in. Notice up here, we're not giving key details that you would consider the third read. We're not going to put a giant $sign, $2 up there. That's not helpful. So larger signage, if you can do something that draws a crowd, people will also notice. A lot of, let's see, I think that PAX, a lot of the crowds were, because there was the big MOBA craze at the time. There were 5 new MOBAs that were being experimented with as esports, and so there was always a big crowd, and you'd be wondering, okay, which one is this? And so you kind of want to get as close as you could to a screen to actually see what was going on. From this distance, you're going to want first read style details, things that are full screen. They probably won't see your character sprite breathing, cool details like that, or droplets from your weather effects and those kinds of particles hitting the ground. From this distance, they might not see that, but they would see something like a smash attack on Smash Brothers, something that makes the whole screen flash or the whole camera shake. Those kinds of effects are important for engaging people at this distance. Props can help too. So Hype Jump made a replica gun, and so even if you couldn't see the screen, you would see people passing in the hallway and like, that person's holding this really cool sci-fi gun. I wonder what that game is. And so people would come over and ask to take pictures, and that would create engagement from a distance. It was also a cool thing to do because it would end up on social media. It would give people something to do while people are playing the game. Destiny took this to another degree. So the Galahorn was a very big item in Destiny. So they made a real one, and it shot t-shirts. And you could definitely hear that from a distance also. Boom. Example that, and I'm allowed to make fun of our own game, an example that isn't so great. This is the title screen of our game, Excelsior. You probably would not guess from this that it is a Zelda-style cooperative game. You might mistake it for a sci-fi shoot 'em up or something like that. And so having the game sit at this from a distance, someone probably might not find much to be interested in, or they might misinterpret what the game's about. And so one way to fix this, possibly that we're considering, is the game should have an autoplay. You know, like a lot of those old games where you just leave Super Metroid on the menu screen and then it starts playing the game for you. Or any arcade game, really. Second distance. This is someone who's walked over, they're observing, and this overlaps the first and second reads. Maybe they can read the third read details. Depends on how close they're getting. This also overlaps the passive to active intents. And so what you want to do here is try to escalate engagement, just like you would at those intent levels, either through conversation, showing them things in the game. Hopefully they get closer. So the third distance is they are actively engaged. They're close enough to actually play your game. This overlaps the second and third reads, overlaps that active or the I need to know more intent. And so very similarly, you want to hook them with details, finalize informing them, and then disengage and let someone else take that spot. Leave them with a call to action and focus on the next person. And so these are the three distances summarized. Distant, kind of watching, and then they actively want to play. Not everyone will go through all three, but get them as close as they can without making them feel uncomfortable. So you have some constraints that you also need to deal with when making your booth and when engaging people. Remember, one time, I've talked about getting rid of people as kindly as possible because your time is limited. Of course, your visitors have limited time. I think, and these are just subjective recommendations. I've heard people say, well, a good game demo is like 15-ish minutes. People who play board games, and see some of you nodded, some of you were like, I only got 15 minutes. I saw those reactions. For board games, it tends to be a little longer. People are more accepting of depth, and so maybe 15 to 30 minutes. It depends. Sometimes it just makes sense to be upfront and say, hey, this demo, it's a 15-minute demo, but you can leave whenever you need to. That's okay. The key is not to trap them. You don't build positive value by making someone feel guilty. So don't say, hey, well, if you leave now, you won't get to see the boss. Don't guilt trip someone. The other angle is you could just ask them, how much time do you have? We'll demo our game for what fits you. And so I've had some people say, oh yeah, I only have 1 minute. Can you give me like the quick loading? And if you keep that in mind when you're preparing, maybe you have a shortcut button that just drops your player at the boss battle or drops them at this point in the game that you really want to focus on for that person. Maybe you'll get lucky and they'll say, you know what, I'm actually having more fun. I will stay for another 10 minutes. And so either tell them how long your thing takes or ask them and try to fit their needs. This is another tough one. It's like asking someone, what order do you watch the Star Wars movies in? Or if I only have time for one Star Wars movie, because somehow I haven't budgeted my life for a fulfilling experience, I'm only going to watch one Star Wars movie in my lifetime. Which one do I watch? No other aids? Sorry, Brian. And so maybe your game depends on prior knowledge. It's a sequel, and you built your pitch on them assuming that they know about the prequel. That's risky. That's very risky. And so you might want to prepare multiple pitches. One tied for someone who's played the prequel, someone who maybe likes a related game, or someone who's coming into it just totally blind. And so try to read their interests, especially at bigger conventions where there are some well-known names going on and people are coming with pins, or they're cosplaying, or they're wearing something that tells you what they're into. Latch onto that. When we demo Excelsior, which is our Zelda-style game, if someone comes up cosplaying as Link, I'm ready for this. Like, we already know we have a match there. So consider alternate pitches to adapt to those interests. And sometimes you just need to fall back on universal appeal. It's like, okay, do you like action-adventure games? Or what age group is your child that you're getting this game for? There are some broad strokes where you can just cater to those in general. universal appeal can actually transcend language sometimes. And so a cool example that comes to mind for me was when I helped Carol Mertz demo Pass the Bucket E3 a couple of years ago. And so this is a game about bluffing, about what tasks you have and what roles you can complete based on different departments that you're working on. And near the end of the convention, I can't remember, I think it was 2 days, maybe it was 3 days at E3, I thought I had the pitch down because I'd done it for almost 20 hours at that point. And so I'm demoing, I'm almost on automatic, on autopilot, because we're almost done and it's time to go home. And this person at the end of the pitch tells me, "Can you slow down and repeat that?" And I thought, oh no, I talked too fast. And then he said, he said, "My girlfriend doesn't speak English." And I thought, wow, that's really cool. I've been working dozens of hours to demo this game, and it never crossed my mind, how can I explain this game to someone who does not speak the same language as me? And what's really cool about Carol's design is the iconography is enough to understand the game. And so at that point, I repeated the pitch, but I did it purely focusing on the icons. She didn't necessarily need to know the inside jokes about IT and customer service. She was still able to enjoy the matching and bluffing portion of the game based on icons. And so that's something you can work into your game, whether it's through the design or through the art. And so that's a pretty, at least for me, an edge case example of working with the constraints of prior experience in demographics, just limited experience with my native language. Third one, comfort and resources. You're given maybe a 10-foot by 10-foot space, or just a 4-foot by 8-foot table. You are the most important presence in that space. That is your space. You own that. Work that space. Take advantage of every inch that is there to promote whatever mission you have. And it's important to understand different conventions charge for different extras. I remember the first few years of PixelPop, it was free, and now it's, what, 50? Which I think is basically the cost of 2 tickets, which you get anyway, so paying to exhibit is like getting 2 free tickets anyway. You might as well, that should not be a barrier. There are other conventions where it is much more restrictive. Extreme example, I helped with an AI-enabled talking mailbox for the USPS. This was shown at CES, so the Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas, possibly one of the biggest electronic shows on the planet. And so we're talking with our manager for being on that convention floor, and they're like, yeah, for electricity you get so much wattage. I'm like, wow, we actually have to measure how many computers we have, because if we blow the fuse, then we're going to have to pay for it to get reset. We can't bring as much as, we can't bring these massive TVs and these massive speakers. We work with an electricity budget. Some places actually charge for that. And then they asked, do we need internet? And they said it was 20,000. Now CES, it's an international show. So we're like, okay, maybe this person, our representative, they've been talking to tons of people. Maybe they assumed we were from Japan and that was in Japanese yen. So we said, what's that cost in US dollars? And we're like, $20,000 for internet. Because this is the Consumer Electronics Show, and Samsung is here, and Toshiba is here, and those people will pay that much for this. And if you think you can be sneaky and bring a hotspot, there's no way you're going to get cell signal. And so they can afford to charge that much for internet. And I mean, really, if you can imagine how big CES is, it's probably a lot of work on the network engineers to keep that internet running. So there's a balance there. So look up the extras. You might be surprised to find out you forgot to ask for electricity. Appeal to visitors' hierarchy needs. I'm talking about like Maslow's hierarchy. At the very bottom, before we care about entertainment, we care about survival. And so for Warped Tour, for example, there's a very real danger of heat stroke. So how do we get people at our booth? Water, shade. For more leisurely conventions, even though it's work, it can be a little leisurely. Some booths will offer alcohol. Can't do that at PixelPop, but there's always the Microsoft booth with alcohol at E3 or GDC. For PAX, the big one was our Cartoon Network booth had padded carpet. Yeah, Ooh. You'd be surprised how many people came over. They didn't care about Adventure Time at all, but they saw like this white padded carpet that was very obviously 3 inches higher than the rest of the convention floor, and it felt good. Especially for me, working that booth for two days, we started getting other people who were working there, and then they would go back to their booths, and then they would tell other people to go visit us, whether it was just for our game or for the carpet. So you'd be surprised. The little perks help. Maybe for PixelPop, it's just chairs. Consider getting some chairs. And so these are the 3 constraints to consider. And so to summarize these different mindsets that I'm proposing, there are 3 intents in general that you have. There's a spectrum of 3-ish intents that your visitors have. They can be anywhere along that spectrum. There are the 3 reads. Again, I found this one out by Gage. I mentioned it because, give credit to where you learned something from. And I condensed his 30-minute talk on that topic to like 6 slides. He went into it a lot more variations, a lot more advanced examples. It's worth researching that. Dealing with 3 levels of distance and 3 kinds of constraints that you should consider. So really, the ideal experience, eventually you want to, whether it's make a sale, share information, there is some success point, but it always ends with the visitor leaving. So in pictorial form, hopefully it goes a little like this. I'm really enjoying your game. You should pre-order via our website over here. You don't want them to stay. So get them out of there. So final details. Don't forget your pitch. Rehearse it. Tons of talks about this topic. I don't want to overdo that one. Focus on calls to action. Every single one of those 3 tiers and every single one of those tools or those mindsets has a different call to action. I know it's hard to memorize all of them, but the more you do this, the more it becomes intuitive. Embrace the constraints that you have. Do something really creative with your space. Don't be afraid to de-escalate. Don't be afraid of rejection. It's part of how this works. Really, the best thing you can do is get in the mindset. So one of the things I thought of in PAX, because there's a lot of people, is I'm going to get rejected by 100 people today. Because it's impossible for me to know. Did I actually get 10 people to download? Did I get 100? I'm not going to watch over their phone as they install it, which is something I've seen other people do, and that's very uncomfortable. Is where I've seen other exhibitors say, hey, do you want to follow me on Twitter? And they say, yeah, and they grab their phone and they follow for them. There's a personal boundary there. So since you can't control measuring success, focus on the number of times you can get rejected. Because like good science, even if an experiment fails to support a hypothesis, we have increased our overall knowledge. And that's how this works. And with that in mind, fail gracefully. Fall back. If they are rejecting going further into your game, leave them with something still worth taking away. Or if there's a bug in your game, you at least know 3 other variations of how to demo it. And so, just want to end with a little bit of self-promo. So PixelPop, we are going to be showing this game Excelsior. It's a Zelda-style cooperative game where you explore, upgrade your items, and solve puzzles. So I'm doing this one. It's a collaboration with Dave, who's up there, under the name Team Pixel. And then I'll also be showing Good Luck, a collaboration with Kes Arnold, under the name Rebel Rouser Studio. This one, you play, it's a Ouija board, you play with NFC-enabled planchettes, and so it's kind of like Clue mixed with a Turing test mixed with Ouija boards. And so we'll be showing that one there. Last but not least, thank you, Riot Games, for coming here. And I'm Rob Santos. If you want to get in touch, reach out. Thank you.
I think they're like 2. Oh yeah, I'm gonna go. Hi. I'm gonna go. So thank you, Rob. That was really super good. Everyone, write down all your questions on your arm in Sharpie so that you can remember them for later. I want to do some magic here. I don't know magic. Hold on. I don't want to. Oh, hey. Play. Cool. All right. So my talk is value of the spectrum, prioritizing work as a small team. So this talk might feel all over the place. I kind of have a lot to say, and I'm not sure I spent enough time kind of tying it together. But hopefully everyone will get something out of it. So first of all, who am I? My name is Wes Ehrlichman. I've been doing agile software development for like more than 15 years in different roles generally on small self-managed teams. My teams have made apps for big clients and to use internally, and have released several apps to the App Store. And although I've been pretty successful at work, I have in my personal life, I haven't had a lot of success with my personal projects. And I kind of, in self-reflection, it's because I'm not really managing them well. I'm not prioritizing my work, and I'm not like focused on my goals, and I'm not doing a lot of the things that I put into this presentation. I did a project for a client recently, an Android app, and that, working with the client, doing a lot of these techniques, I was able to actually ship it for them on time and at budget, and it kind of validated the need to do this kind of thing in my personal life. So that's kind of where this talk is coming from. It's coming from the things I've learned, like actually do apply outside of like getting paid during the day. So yeah. So my talk is going to be split up into 4 sections, because you can't just talk about prioritization in a vacuum. Prioritization, a lot of things go into the order that you choose to do things and what you choose to do. Why you're doing it, the tools that you use, the way that you kind of think about the work that you're going to do, and then finally, like what you choose to do first. So, yeah. Practically, it involves why, how, what, and when. And there's also a who and a why not, but I'm not going to get into those. So, but those are important things to think about. So first, we'll talk about goals. You shouldn't do anything until you know why. So this first step, the first slide is about project management. So we tend to shy away from that as indies and hobbyists, but project management as a concept is really just the organization and strategic execution of everything that needs to get done to tackle a goal on time and within budget. So I highlighted on time, within budget, and goal, because those are the things that we as indies and hobbyists a lot of times like ignore in the face of what we want to do. So is on time and within budget really a problem? So I'm going to ask some questions. How many people in this room have released a game? All right, awesome. So how many people in this room have abandoned one that they felt had potential? So it looks like it's at least double or more. And I think that if we delve into why, I think both money and time are the resources that you're putting into one of those games that either succeeds or fails are ultimately, in the end, they boil down to money and time. You can make up for time with money by hiring other people, and you can make up for money with time. If you put enough monkeys at a typewriter and they'll draft all the works of Shakespeare. So you just with enough time you can learn to do anything. But a lot of times finding the balance between those things is the key to reaching your goals. So if you acknowledge those constraints, then doing the right thing, then you'll recognize that doing the right thing within those constraints, meaning like the timing out, is more important than just like getting stuff done, which tends to be what we focus on. So even if your game does get done, there's no guarantee of success. So of the people that have released games, how many of them feel like the game they released met their expectations? Okay. So we're like taking that existing set. It got way bigger with people who haven't released stuff, and now it's way smaller with people that have met their expectations. I think that us as indie developers keep our expectations nebulous, and we kind of cross our fingers really hard that the right person will stumble on our game, and we'll end up with like the next Flappy Bird or Minecraft. That's not a realistic thing, and it's too risky to be worth like the investment of time and money that you're putting into your games. So in order to be successful, we need to define what success looks like, and we need to scope down our work around what that success criteria is for us. In the same way that we are, I think, are pretty good at scoping down our games, we also need to scope our expectations down and our goals down so that we can define what success is. There was one of the best resources in just thinking about this was a, it's not hot. Anyways, I'm not going to get into that because I can't remember the details. But anyways, cool. So why is success more difficult for indies and hobbyists? Because there's frequently little to no deadlines, frequently little to no budgets, and frequently no finite goals. Kind of got into this, but what that really means is you need to set a higher level goal. And what a high level goal looks like is generally smart. Goals are, a good goal is specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and timely. The ones that I want to talk about are measurable, attainable, and timely. Measurable is really easy for binary goals, like was this released or was this not released? But for a lot of goals, we're going to want to make a certain amount of money or get a certain number of users. And those kinds of things are easier to track now than ever. But a lot of times as we release stuff, we don't actually think about tracking those things. We don't implement the analytics that we need to incorporate into our games in order to allow us to measure those things. So, so prioritizing those, like the ability to gather metrics and identifying what those metrics are up front are really, really super important. And it's something that a lot of us overlook. Attainable is another thing. I mentioned it earlier, but your first, second, or third game will not be the next Minecraft. If you don't know what realistic expectations are, then a good technique is to look at similar games to yours and compare, like, kind of try to dig up. You can even reach out to them and find out, like, how their game did and some of the things that they did to get it to reach that success. But if barring any sense of like what attainable is, there's other tools available, like doing a Kickstarter. Kickstarter, the entire platform exists to help you know whether your goals are attainable, whether or not like people care about what you're going to build. So it's a lot of work, but it's a good way to evaluate those expectations. And timely just means that you should hold yourself accountable for achieving your goal in a reasonable time. If you don't do this, what's going to happen with that, all your like time and money resources, you're going to lose momentum and lose motivation, and or take on like way too much risk with the thing that you're doing, and your project's going to end up failing, and you're going to end up letting yourself down. So setting a firm time limit and like working toward that and with that constraint will help you make better decisions and force you to really think things through through the lens of the goal that you have set. So, and then if you set like a simple goal, like release your game, that shouldn't be the end. You should set another attainable goal and evolve your game toward that goal. Because generally, releasing a game is good internally, but we want some extrinsic benefits also. So. piling onto that with the second phase with the new goal is a really good way to evolve your games. So, yeah. So some possible goals. What are some good goals? Anyone?
Finish the game.
Learn how to do one mechanic you want to implement in your game.
Yeah, that's a good one. Like learning whether you're, personally, a lot of my goals early on were like, learn whether this game idea is going to be fun. And I think that understanding what that goal is will make you feel a lot more successful than just like starting a game and going to do it. Because if you identify, I want to learn this, get to that point, then you're successful and your sense of accomplishment will go up over time. Anyone else? Yeah, do it.
Find out if your game is marketable.
Yeah. Find out if your game's marketable. That's a really good one because a lot of times before you invest money in something, you want to know whether your goal is going to be attainable, and like setting even whether this goal is attainable as your first goal is a good start, and it will prevent a lot of pain later. So, anyone else? Some of the ideas I had were create a vertical slice or like a playable demo of your game. That's a really good first goal. Create a minimum viable product. So one way to make a game is to create a releasable game, and that might not meet some of your like higher level extrinsic goals, but that you can build on top of toward those goals later on and set subsequent goals. Another one is just release a project and then set another goal on top of that. Reaching a certain number of players is a really good one, and make money. What's interesting about the certain number of players goal is a lot of people pay for user acquisition because having a certain set of number of users will make your game and your company like itself sellable. And like thinking outside the box in terms of like how your game can be successful can also be really valuable. And then another one is like make money. And also because you looked at the slide, I get to hit your arm. So as a gamer, which most of us are in this room, you are uniquely suited to be successful at this goal setting thing. Because as gamers, we think 3 moves ahead. We think about like what our goals are, and we put things in place to get there, and kind of like understand what the risks are going to be. You're also used to figuring out the most efficient way to meet goals, and you also are used to failing and learning and trying again until you meet your goals. That's a really important one that people like don't really. That when you start working with other people that aren't gamers, a lot of times you're like it's hard to understand why they're afraid to fail. But as gamers, we're kind of conditioned to fail and try again. And that's something that games have taught us that make us really good at this kind of thing. So yeah, so next there is tools. This picture here, when I just Googled like Trello games or something, it came up. This is Subnautica's bug tracking board. And they have a publicly facing Trello board that shows all of the bugs that they have in their game. And you can look at it and kind of see what they're going to try to fix next. It's just a really interesting way for them to track the work that they know they need to do. And that the game is left early access and they still have all these bugs, which is another thing I'll get into later. So I'm going to talk about Kanban because it's my favorite thing. It's the best way to do any kind of like work tracking. So Kanban as a concept is technically a process that was developed by Toyota to eliminate waste. Eliminating waste is valuable, the process is really valuable, but regardless of whether you follow the prescribed process, what's more important is just the tools to facilitate Kanban are all really, really good, generally. Like the tools allow you to track things and keep track of where things are, and just kind of like think through things the way that that you should be, but might not be if you're not writing things down and tracking them. So how a Kanban board works is you will talk about what needs to be done for your game, and you'll make cards in like a backlog or a to-do list. And then as you decide as you need work to do, you grab from your to-do list, move it to doing, like generally mark it with your name or your face and whoever else you might be working on it with, and then work on it, and then when you're done, move it to done. and then grab the next thing in the to-do list, move it to doing, move it to done. The main goal of the Kanban board is communication and making sure that everyone on the team has a chance to understand the work that's being done and gets an opportunity to discuss how valuable that piece of work is. If you're not doing something like this where you're tracking what you're doing, generally you tend to think of your project in a nebulous way. Like, here is what this is going to look like at the end. We kind of know what the story is going to be. We know these assets need to be built. Now let's go. When you do that, you tend to do what you want to do, like pretty much the whole way. You tend to not coordinate what you're doing with the other people on your team, and then you tend to get frustrated with each other because you're like, why are these people not doing what needs to be done? It should be obvious. Like, we know this game is about a desert with people fighting. So, so Kanban is more valuable than like any of these columns or anything like that. Is forcing that communication with your team and forcing kind of alignment about what needs to be done. So, you don't just need those 3 columns. There's a lot of different ways to do it, and so one way is like what I had before, to do, doing, done. Another way is a backlog, where you keep track of like high-level ideas. As you decide to do them, move them into a prioritized queue, and then do, doing, and done. And then there's also super complicated ways, which is kind of what we do on my team, which is ridiculous, where you have a backlog, designer that when things are ready for design, you move them over there. Design for when they're working on it. When things are done being designed, they move to ready for dev. As developers pull them, they pull them into dev. When we're done, we do code, put it in ready for code review. A different person will pick it up, do the code review. The testers we move it over and get it ready for test. The testers will test it, and then that'll go to ready for demo and done. This is valuable if you have a lot of people that have very well prescribed like roles, or you want to make sure that you're not dropping something on the floor. But it means that it means that you need to be a lot more diligent about what you choose to do, because getting all these people involved in all these steps for something that you might stop in the middle of or like not be the most valuable thing is just kind of a waste of everyone's time. So that's when prioritization becomes even more important. So these are just some ideas, but what's important is not that you follow any of these prescribed things. It's important that you work with your team to find something that works for those individuals. What's also important is that you, as people come in and join, you iterate on that, because everyone kind of works differently. On my current project, we had a designer from the beginning that kind of like took ownership of the project and kind of like wanted to get ahead of everything we showed the client. So before we basically we didn't even have a design column. Like, all of the work that we had ready to develop was already like designed and waiting. So like, he lived in kind of his own process outside of this, and it worked really well. But he left, and we got a new designer, and the other designer had less sense of ownership over the project, and we kind of had to work with him for him to understand how, like, what goals were needed to be solved by the things that needed designs. So we ended up adding these cues in order to make him more like part of the process and feel like and not overlook communication that needed to happen. So adjusting the process around your team and being flexible and not necessarily prescribed is really, really important. And also having the team define it is super important. This can't be something one person owns, or else that one person is going to be the only person that cares about it. Yeah. So, and it's really, really valuable to keep everyone working on the same board instead of splitting off to separate boards for everyone, because like I said, the communication is the most important thing. The tracking the work comes second. So, one of the best tools I know that's free is Trello, which a lot of people know of. Who's used Trello before in here? Yeah, so a lot of people. Trello is awesome because it has really good design. It has a mobile app that integrates into your account. It's free. One of the things you can create your own columns and you can name them whatever you want, but there's not a lot of flexibility in terms of like So one of the ideas that you can do with Kanban is create a swim lane. So like if something is super duper important, you can make a lane for that. Trello doesn't really support that. Some things like these cards on this board, they don't have numbers next to them. So if you want to tie one of these cards to a commit to the repo or something, it's a lot harder because they don't have numbers. So you can actually get a Chrome plugin which will add numbers that are the same across all of everyone running Trello, and that helps a lot. But it's kind of weird to have to do that. And then you don't get any metrics for how well your productivity is. There's some things you can buy that are a little bit janky, but off the shelf, you don't really get anything. This board here is for the open source project that the community did a few years ago. And this is Randy, and this is me. And Randy and I used it to kind of communicate and kind of decide this is what we need to work on. And it worked pretty well. So the interesting thing about this was we did demos at all the meetups. So whenever we finished some work, we would say, okay, this is ready to demo at the next meetup. So that's another good kind of a checkpoint to reassess your board. My favorite Kanban board is a physical board, like a cork board. I like cork boards more than like whiteboards with Post-its because Post-its lose their stickiness and things fall off and get lost. Cork boards are a lot more intentional. There's the benefit of using a physical board is working in actual space with other people is a lot more effective than working remotely if you can do it. But realistically, you can't do this if you work remotely. It's also nice, but they are ultimately the best because your process is not bound at all to the tool itself, and you can kind of just do whatever you want that's going to meet your team's needs. We also talked about that goal earlier. If you have a physical board, you can post the goal nearby or make it part of your board. You can kind of do whatever you want. But like I said, it doesn't work with remote workers, and there's no productivity metrics. And
I would just like to point out, it feels really good to physically move the parts.
That's true.
That's a really good positive feedback.
And because you get that positive feedback, you're incentivized to do other good things, like make smaller things so you can move them more often and feel real good. So yeah, I recommend that. You also can sing, I want to get physical. Yeah. Don't sing again. So.
Having a physical board also really helps do it at a scrum meeting or in person.
Yeah, that's true.
People involved.
Yeah. It can be a collaborative thing where you all kind of move it together.
You also don't need electricity.
No, you don't need well, who cares? Electricity, whatever. No offense, Ryan. That's good. Good job. All right. So some other free options. These are things I didn't look at, but I think they seem super cool. GitHub.com now has a project board, which is what this picture is. It's built into GitHub. I think you just toggle something on and you get access to it. And you can configure this so that cards are bound to specific, you can, as you commit to cards, it can move the cards automatically over for you. So it can automate a lot of the tracking and annoyingness of making sure that you're tracking your board. And it looks pretty flexible. You can do things like make checklists on the cards and stuff like that, but I haven't used it. And then Airtable.com, Butterscotch Shenanigans for a while back were going on and on about Airtable, and I was like, whatever. I like Trello. But apparently they have a Kanban overview, and they have a pretty flexible way of displaying all your
They're actually using Trello now.
I know, I saw. Yep. Yeah, they talked about Trello in their last podcast. They use it a little bit differently, though. Yeah.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
I just want to say, the GitHub project boards are awesome. I've used those for several personal projects, and they are, especially because they tie together with the code commits really well. So, moving things across the board is, you can do it via commit messages and stuff, and it's really cool.
All right. So, yeah. How they're using Trello sounded a little bit different, because I don't think that they, most of this talk, no, just kidding. But no, I think that they just were dropping conversations on the floor and not tracking the decisions that they've made. So whenever they have come up with an idea, they'll put the card on the board. And then when they have conversations about it, they'll keep adding and adding to it. So I think it's less about prioritization and more about making sure that things are tracked, and then making sure that when people commit, it's real visible and everyone can kind of see what it is, which is similar, but like I'm not sure that they use it for prioritization, but it was hard to tell from their conversation. So yeah, any other suggestions? Okay, cool. So I kind of alluded to this earlier, but pick a tool, make some lanes, work for a week, and evaluate how well your process is working with your team. You're not going to know what the right process is from the start because everyone's different. If anyone on your team changes, you should reevaluate your process and adjust with their input. As a general rule, to improve your process, you should look for certain smells. One smell would be if somebody is working on more than one card at the same time. That's a sign that they're blocked on something or like that they aren't as interested in something. And generally, what's happening there is there's waste happening because things are not moving across the board. They're not finishing things, or maybe they're stuck and they need help. So definitely, that's a good time to have a conversation. Like, why are you working on both at the same time? If they're bought in on the concept, a lot of times it's just, oh, I forgot to take my name off of it. But that's a good sign that maybe your process could adjust it somewhat. If a card stays on the board for like a long time, it's another need for discussion. Like if somebody's been working on something for like 3 days or a week, then they probably either need help or they're not like taking the project very seriously. But like, yeah, holding each other accountable is really important, and that's another thing to look for. And then another one is if a card that's valuable is not being pulled, people keep like avoiding it, then that's really a good time for a discussion because it means that you're not going to meet your goal because like what needs to be done is not going to get done. So the board is mainly there to expose problems and drive conversation and help you prioritize. So as you make those cards, there's there's a good way to think about the work that you do. So this is going to be about that. So our general nature is to think about things in terms of tasks. Like I need to get this work done, and then I can move on and get the next piece of work done. But if you think about work in terms of tasks, then you tend to lose sight of why you're doing the work, and instead focus on doing the work itself. User stories are a way to think about to focus on why you're doing the work and what the outcome is, and focus less on how it's done, which also frees you up to solve problems in innovative ways, in an interesting kind of like think outside of the box. So you can read that. But yeah, value. So yeah, it's better to think about value. Value can be a decision the player needs to make. It could be content that provides the player a certain feeling, or it could be something that you as a developer need to learn. A card should be more about the why you're doing it than about the how. On the following slides, I'll give some tips. And if this sounds a lot like the goals slide that I had earlier, that's because the card should be thought of kind of as mini goals. It's like, why do I need to do this? Focus on that instead of like what I'm doing. So just start with you don't need to do all that for every single card. I would just start with the title and have that title be the promise of the conversation with your team to figure out really what's needed and figure out what the goal of it is and whether or not you really need to do it. Don't waste your time overthinking something that you're not going to do. At the beginning, just name it with something that has enough detail for your team to understand. As things get closer to development, add more detail. One strategy a lot of teams use is the as a, I want, so that. This is, I like this, but I think like at a certain point, this is a good way to make sure that you think of like who you're doing this for and why you're doing it. But at a certain point, once you internalize kind of that's why you do work, then you can kind of move beyond this and get to just kind of like the why you're doing the card and not focus on following a format. But this is a really good start, and it's a really good way to think about things. One thing that people generally overlook is the role. Generally, people just put as a user, but really, like, there are a lot of types of users of your app or of your game. there's, I wish, yeah, people play games for a lot of reasons, and you could target the specific reason that the specific type of player that you want with a certain thing. Like the feel of a game is like a certain type of player. So if you want to work toward that player, then you can actually put that in the role and just get to a common way of communicating. So I just gave some examples. Like as a player, I want a flying enemy, so I can have the challenge of timing my attacks while jumping. That card probably at some time just looked like flying enemy. And if you just think of it as flying enemy, you'll add it to the game. But if you think about why you're doing it, it changes how you actually solve the problem. And because so I can time my attacks while jumping, you're going to focus on how that feels and like and the joy that players feel when they like do something that's mechanically difficult, more than just like, oh, now there's content. Content itself doesn't provide value so much as the reason that content exists. And then as a developer, I want to automate my release process so that I don't spend as much time preparing beta test builds. That's just one of those things that you sometimes want to invest time into automation so that you're not wasting it all like doing the same thing over and over again. If you're having trouble answering the so that part, you're not really interested in why you're doing something, then maybe you don't want to do that card, or maybe the card's not as valuable. And if you have like a high level card and then you go to like pull it, you don't remember what it's about, just throw it away. Nobody like if nobody cares about it anymore, then it never was that important. So another acronym to help you write stories is INVEST. This is generally just like what a good story meets all of these kind of attributes. So independent, negotiable, valuable, estimatable, small, and testable. When your team is planning the work to do, this is a super good way to evaluate your cards. The two that I think are really interesting and I'll focus on are independent and small, because those two tend to be fight against each other a lot. Independent is this thing needs to stand alone, and I need to be able to potentially maybe release the app after this is done, or like this is a problem that's solved all the way from top to the bottom, even if it's just like a small vertical slice. But then small, there's some people will say all of your stories should be like the same size. I think that's a really hard metric to meet, because certain times you can provide value without something that takes like half a day or a day. And sometimes some things are just hard problems, you don't know how to do it. You don't want to shy away from those things. So yeah, I like this as sized appropriately, because more important than just like have an arbitrary this is what small is that this is sized appropriately for the work that you're doing. But it is always worth breaking down cards when you can into smaller things when you can provide value with less work. So, but yeah, there's no silver bullet, and what matters is that your team agrees and that you're getting work done. So prioritization, we're here. This will tie all together. Now that we have our goal and we have a place to track it, we have a good description of the work, we can begin to prioritize it. So to prioritize cards, generally you'll take your compound board and move the most important things to the top. As things move up and become more important, that's your sign to put more detail into the cards, have more conversations, and begin kind of committing to who's going to do the work. You're going to prioritize your card. A good way, the best way I've seen to prioritize cards is against each other. Like if this is really important, like is this more or less important? And as you move these things up and down against each other, you kind of get a sense of what the actual need is, and that feeling of just like moving things up and down against each other is really, it's like a tangible way of just thinking through it. If you don't have this board, then you're a lot of times you'll grab just the thing that you want and not the thing that's the highest, or the thing that is the highest and that you can do. But when you think of an idea and you go in to add the card, what I like to do is put it in approximately the place that it should be on the board, like in terms of your own sense of its priority. And then before you pull it in, just have a discussion with the team as part of your process of like, is this really how valuable it is? I think teams that generally agree on the same goal will prioritize all of the cards within one slot of each other, like almost 90% of the time. And if they don't, then those are conversations you need to be having, because maybe you're not bought in on the goal, or maybe one of those cards isn't as valuable as you think it is. Yeah, when adding cards to the board, it's important that everyone on the team understands that they can do it. This can't be just one person's responsibility, or people aren't going to be invested in the project. And this also includes bugs. Like some people say that all bugs need to be taken care of, but I don't think that's realistic. I think that everything has bugs, and bugs impact impact users at a different level. So when you add a bug to the board, consider how critical it is, consider the impact to your players, consider how hard it's going to be to solve and how much complexity it's going to add to the code. And then also, if there's an obvious workaround, then it only affects a certain subset of users, and it's probably less important than something valuable that you could be doing. And also, do this as a team, which I said earlier. Whether your team agrees is an important time for conversation, and maybe reading the cards in the place. Cool. And again, do the right thing. Yeah, doing the right work is way more important than just getting work done. Having the board, having cards, talking about cards, all of those things are going to help you make sure that you're investing your time and money toward the most important thing rather than just the thing that you want to do. One of the places where this becomes a challenge for indies and hobbyists is with things like marketing and PR. We tend to avoid that kind of thing because we're not very good at it. But then that's definitely going to impact our feeling of success and our ability to reach whatever goals we have. So putting those cards up there and being honest when you prioritize them around other stuff is one of the things that's going to help make your game a success by whatever metric you have. So it sounds obvious, but we don't always do this. So we'll play a game now. So let's prioritize this order. Who wants to play? Brian, you always want to play. What about you, Rob? You can say or you can get up. It's real flexible.
As a group, I don't want to.
Okay. So which one's first? Okay. Look at these cards like that. So which is the first thing you should do?
Set up down.
Oh, good. Yeah, good. Okay, what's the next thing you should do? All right, that's cool. What's the next thing you should do?
Add analytics.
Change every color.
Yeah.
All right, and what's the next thing you should do?
Shift the game.
Add analytics. Okay. So I think those two are the only ones that you could really debate on. Adding analytics and changing the enemy color. I think that this is kind of where that goal comes in. If you identify what your goal is, and one of these things is going to go toward that goal, then you're going to have an easier time making that decision. I didn't put the goals on here because just to kind of make that point. Like, if you have a goal, then it makes those kind of debatable things a lot easier to solve. And if everyone on the team agrees with it, then you'll end up pulling the right thing. And now let's play number 2. All right. You can take a minute.
Question, legal requirement, what is that?
So the example, this is actually a real one scenario. The example that we had was adding open source licenses. Because if you're using open source frameworks, you're supposed to put the open source licenses in your framework. So, yeah.
It's probably number 1.
You think that's number 1?
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. So number 1 is legal requirements. What would come next?
Well, okay.
Obviously.
That actually goal basis. I would argue accessibility would be 1. determining what kind of accessibility is needed, who's going to be doing it, things like that, because that then determines what we need to use for libraries, which will affect the legal requirements.
Okay, so like, number one is accessibility. Okay, which one? What's number? So number one's accessibility. Number two is legal requirement. Which one should come next? Release the game. So. Yeah. So, anyways, there's actually not a good answer here, obviously. It's way harder, and it's pretty much impossible if you don't know what the goal is. So, for things like accessibility, I'm kind of a jerk. I don't think it's that important. But I think that, but I think that there's ways to make it more important, and there's ways to make it to adapt it to your goal. So if accessibility is a real hot buzzword, it's really important, and it can get you marketing that you might not otherwise have. So like the Xbox One just added an accessibility controller, which I'm sure they're not going to make money on, but like the fact that they released that gave Xbox like a ton of buzz, like a ton of press. That was like, that's more valuable than however many of those things that they sell at whatever price. And that's where you can take one of these things that you want to do but doesn't really work toward your goal and adapt it to meet your goal. And it's also going to hold you accountable for doing the things you should be doing alongside the things you want to do. So yeah. I was thinking about this because I don't have a good answer for it. But what I would do is I would do this card, and then 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 this card. Oops, shit. You didn't see that, Dan?
Don't worry, the entire room rented.
Yeah. So, yeah, I think there is value in releasing early, releasing often, getting feedback, and determining what you should do next based on the feedback you get from users and the understanding of what's valuable. So, especially if you have that goal and it doesn't really overlap with any of these things, you can release, work toward that goal, set a new goal that might incorporate one of these things. So, yeah. And then finally, reevaluate regularly. So I've said this before, but look at your board every workday so that you can check on the progress of the team. Reevaluate the highest priority items frequently, at least once a week, or just every time you meet with your team, or when you exhaust the queue of things you've really put detail into, like make time to go and talk to your team and put more things into that queue. And then also reevaluate your process regularly, and definitely when parts of your team aren't making progress or there's problems, kind of alluded to by those smells earlier. So, yeah. So in conclusion, create a high-level goal that the teams want in on, create a board full of ideas along with your team to aid in communication, prioritize cards against each other and against your team's goal, add detail and assess the value of your ideas as it gets closer to the time to implement them, and adapt your process to meet your team's needs. Finally, ship your stuff. As important as working on the right thing is, in the end you'll learn a lot more from failing spectacularly in public than you will from toiling away at something alone and awaiting perfection. So learn what you can, improve every day, and ship your game. Any questions?
So with the cards, like the roll, does that have to be a person, or could that be like another system? Like if you have like if you're working on building an AI system that has to interact with something else, would you say like as a AI agent or as like a sniper character, I want something so that I can kill the player? You know what I mean? Like would that be valid or not?
So I worked on a hex-based strategy game once, and one of the things that we struggled with was all those edge cases ended up being a whole lot of logic that I would have to implement as one-offs for every single character. So in that case, I think it makes sense to make that specific thing a card, but it might make more sense to come up with a rule engine where you don't have to do that individually for every project, but like create a tool that allows the people I was building it for to kind of write their own rules around all the parameters in the game. And in that case, just like, you're not going to come up with that maybe by yourself, because you're going to be focused on that one what, which is kind of what that part is, and you're good, and more like why. And if you answer that why, like, then well, along with your team or your stakeholders, then you might come up with that different approach that's going to really speed things up in the end.
Is that make my 2 cents?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. So we use a version of this at our work actually the same place, just different teams. But it helps to think of the roles not as like roles like admin or artist or QA or person who's like playing your game shoes. It helps to think of them as perspectives. So user who has never played your game before, user who has a problem with the mouse control for some reason, user who is colorblind, that sort of thing will kind of not only like not pigeonhole you into like weird, generic, and very broad things, but like actually get you into like actionable places that you can think about the problem.
One of the things that our teams do recently also at work is take that to the next level and come up with like a user profile for different types of users that will use the app, and actually print out a piece of paper with like some stock photography of like what you think that person might look like, along with like what they value and kind of like what's driving them to use the app. And if you do that and post it in a clear, visible area, like in your team area, visible, then you can kind of like adapt that to your card and really think about who you're targeting.
Yeah, my experience has been once you get down to where you're saying, as a system, you're usually talking about how we do lost by that level. So it's usually better to do what you were saying, step up and say, what are the users that are going to use the system? What will write the user stories? What's that? And let the rest of those details be guidance.
Does anyone else have questions or want to contribute to the conversation?
I have a question. So I know a lot about accessibility with like software and stuff, but what different accessibility thing, or I guess text-box speaking, like, what does that mean for me being accessible? Or how would a blind person play a visually?
Well, I think blind people can play, so that's like a high level topic, but there's like, you could probably do a whole talk on accessibility, but some things that I've seen is like the footsteps when people are on the ground, like making a different sound in different areas, it'll take a blind person more time to figure out how to plug it in, but if they can use that kind of thing to sense where they are and kind of get a feel for the environment, then they can figure out, they have in the past like figured out how to beat games using just like the sound of the footsteps, the timing of like certain enemies and things like that.
FIFA got in trouble with accessibility because a lot of blind people actually play FIFA, and they changed the way that the sounds happen. So how they kicked the ball changed because they updated the sound to be a different sound.
Also, great question. Something that I like a lot about user stories and stuff too is that when they're done well, especially over time, they create really clear boundaries as far as what your project does, what it doesn't do, and why. Right? So, like with the accessibility, like my general thought is make things as accessible as possible, but like making Doom playable by someone who is blind is a very different amount of work and problem to solve than making like potentially blackjack playable by someone who is blind. You know what I mean? Because the two things are very, very different. So as a team, in the beginning, if you want to do it like that, when the stories are created, one side effect is that the audience, if it isn't clear from the very beginning, the audience for the game will become clear as you work on it. And so when someone says, hey, I'd really like to do this, or open the game up to this group of people, you have a good idea if that's feasible or not, and to what extent things would need to be done to make that happen. Does that make sense?
So, Rob, do you want to come up and we can do questions about both at the same time? I don't understand what you're using. No, I'm kidding. Yeah, does anyone have any questions for me or for Rob?
I do have a question for
Okay,
Rob.
yeah, that's it.
So regarding your saying tracking new users that you obtain from going to these events,
Yeah.
Have you, it seems perfectly valid where you have some card that might have a QR code or something on it. The user could scan it and they get like a new skin that is specific to that event, and then you can track, okay, these many users then scan this QR code. I think that'd be a valid and an effective way to track users who are affected by the event.
Totally, yeah.
I think that would help, but I don't think that would give you necessarily accurate count because some people may not care about the QR code or else the skin if they just want to download the game.
Probably true.
There are things like that that like tag intent or behavior to the install, so like codes. And a lot of people don't even realize that. They think they're getting something for free. But yeah, you kind of are, in a way, you're tainting the marketing data because you're giving them, you're incentivizing them in a different way that doesn't perfectly match, oh, these installs happen because of this event. So that could be get the best data that you can.
Like I would, especially with a limited budget and limited opportunity to go to festivals or things like this, like what would be some kind of way to measure ROI to know if the money that was put in was justified and worth it or not?
Yeah, I have known talked to a lot of devs who they stopped going because of that, because they cannot tangibly tie it to an ROI thing. But at the same time, it kind of falls under marketing, where the simple fact that I got to be at E3 was because of becoming friends with other developers who turned out to need help demoing their games, that sort of thing, which led to other connections, which has led to jobs teaching and things like that. So it can be a very subjective and organic thing where the ROI in terms of dollars is not what's important. Kind of like you were saying about the accessibility controller for Xbox. Sometimes it is the intangible marketing. Other times, yeah, if you can tie it to some kind of data tag, whether it's because people are typing in codes, if it's a mobile app where you can request geographic data, and you find out, oh, they added it when they were in the vicinity of this event, then you can start to get data for that. But all kinds of companies are pushing back on the right to privacy to not be tracked based on that kind of intent or information.
So, Butterscotch talked a little bit about that, and they said that one of the benefits that was more intangible was like the awards that they give out at conferences and stuff. Like having that award again doesn't have any intrinsic ROI, but having the award gives you a sense of credibility that if somebody sees that, they're going to immediately they're going to give your game placed next to a similar one more weight, even if they have never heard of that award before. So that's something that can work in your favor too.
Yeah. And if you think about like the chain of events that happen during marketing, how many times have I told myself, I bought this game because I met the developer at the conference, versus kind of the butterfly effect of, I bought this game because someone talked to me who talked to someone else who met someone at a conference, or maybe because that article was written because of a conference. Like the chain of events is so vast, making decisions purely on the ROI that you can measure, you might miss out on a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, so this question is kind of half-baked, so doing my best, but basically when you're part of a piece of some marketing strategy for like Cartoon Network or something, so when you go to these cons and gatherings and whatnot, has Cartoon Network ever gone to you, or whoever you're working with, gone to you and said, or maybe you just decided for yourself, like, hey, we have like these other advertising things going on. Your job is to X, or your job is to create like evangelizers for us, or anything like that. Have you ever like had those goals set out for yourself or given to you?
Yeah, so like they were at the same. So for the Cartoon Network project specifically, at the same time PAX was happening, the TV ads were first going out. Ads were going to movie theaters. Like these were all separate things handled by separate people. And so when it's that big of an operation, it tends to get a little siloed, at least to the degree that I was involved. I was brought purely to fix things if they went wrong from a dev perspective. They didn't tell it to me. They acted like I was going on vacation. But it was very obvious I was there to fix things if bugs popped up. I can't remember any bugs popping up, so I'm happy with that. But because you care about the project, then you kind of organically slide into this role of, I like what I've created, and that part of me is going to show when I talk to other people and share my own personal excitement. I can imagine that there were other people there who were working the booth where their job was just to tour, and whatever games were showing at the time, that's what they would show. And so maybe they were given more of a specific script or points to hit when they're talking.
Yeah, like I guess what I'm asking is like in a con, even a big one, you'll see like 500 people a day versus like you get a banner ad somewhere and theoretically see like 1,000 people a day, and the con's only going to be for 3 days, so like 1,500 people tops. So with those 1,500 people, what are you hoping to like ultimately get out of that? Is it just sales, or just like more surface area and maybe some press, or
Yeah, so it's a mix, and this one definitely, it does differ from project to project, but word of mouth, play testing, bug checking. The Cartoon Network one, weird one. They were kind of put on a kiosk, so something like this where it was angled, and the iPads were placed like this, but the game was meant to be played landscape. Just the way the carpenters built that thing, it was meant to hold iPads like this. You would not think this, but the number of people who would kind of crane their heads sideways and play our landscape game at a 90-degree angle, like that's not something you think of until you bring it to a convention. Is it necessarily something you fix in the game? No, but it reveals to you all these weird UI situations where you don't realize it until you bring it to a convention, at the very least. For press specifically, it's usually not the best idea to just be there and assume press will happen. A good part of it is to make appointments. If you can get a private one-on-one appointment, that's awesome. Sometimes these folks are busy, and so the benefit of the booth is to say, such and such journalists stop by our booth at this time. Some of them who like doing video content, they want that footage of the booth to show not just the demo or the playthrough, but the way show other people enjoying it. Yeah.
Question for Wes.
Yep.
So as far as breaking down stories when you're working with a customer, what are your thoughts on when that happens, but outside of the development team? Like where they're breaking it down and like, what do you want? Here's like this. Exactly.
So I think that you need to adapt to the customer's expectations, but you also have to kind of like try to nudge them into what's going to be effective, if possible. But ultimately, like you're stuck in the situation you are. I would talk to whoever they're having conversations with from your company and figure out if like representatives from your team, from the actual dev team, can be involved in that discussion, and so that like at least the understanding of why can make it back through the chain to the team with less links in the chain. Yeah, I've got the opposite problem on my current project, where we have like an hour with our customer. Our whole team is there, but like a week. So we have to get a lot of information out of them. So we end up kind of taking the details of like what we're going to implement, rolling them up into like a high-level idea, and getting them to prioritize those high-level ideas, and then as a team breaking those high-level ideas back down into actual like smaller like vertical slices for our team to actually work on. So it ends up taking like 2 hours total to like compress and decompress for this one meeting, but it optimizes their time and their executives so that we don't have a lot of time with them. And it works really well, mainly because we have that goal well defined, like with them. We all understand what the expectations are. So those details and like how we fill those in are informed by our understanding of what the outcomes they want are. So we don't have to like bounce every little thing off of them. We can just like make decisions based on our experience as developers, with the knowledge that like if it's not the right one, we get feedback every week, and we'll modify it or like adjust it, and that we know what their intent is, and we have gained a lot of their trust through that process just by respecting their time.
Anyone else?
Cool, awesome.
Oh, one more?
For Wes, how do you work that with meetings where they really just want to pitch you ideas and they don't know what to do?
You just have to respectfully find a way to like not fight back, but like work within the constraints you have. So it's okay to also mess up, as long as you mess up in small pieces, and course correcting isn't that hard. Actually, that's like, I didn't put that slide in, but that's like one of the most important things I do as an agile developer is write code with the knowledge it's going to change. So that means like write tests around it. So if something's going to break, you know like what changed in other places, so you can update those tests there and fix it. You construct your classes so that the API makes sense no matter how messy the inside is. So that as like business logic changes and things like that, that API is pretty static, and like what changes on the inside is going to be the thing that is pretty relatively easy to manage. And just breaking your code into modular pieces so that if you do something wrong, you're just switching out one of those modules or kind of rethinking that small piece. And that's how you can kind of take this idea and take the idea of just reacting to change and iterating and make it easier to adapt to. So you also need to make sure with your customer that they're okay with you screwing up. You need to have an agreement with your customer that if they don't want to put the time in to prioritize, that they're okay with you messing up. So it's harder to do, but it's really, really important. So, and I've learned that customers will respect you having that conversation and putting it in like having a shared understanding of where responsibilities are a lot more than just like messing up and blaming them. So.
Cool. If you think of any more questions, definitely get in touch with Wes or myself.
Yeah.
Upcoming events.
I've
This
written that.
Thursday is the Game Dev Drink Up, 8 p.m. Orbit Pinball Lounge.
So also today a game came out. Echoes of the Fae: The Last Sacrament.
All right.
Yeah. Woodsy Studio released that, and it's available on Steam. You should download it when you get home. And then the other big one. What's
You got
happening
the list.
July 28th and 29th. You know what's happening.
PixelPop is at the end of the month.
PixelPop's at the end of the month. The co-op will be there. We are sponsoring one of the parties. So it should be a fun party. We're going to have music, we're going to have food, we're going to have drinks, we're going to have games to play.
I'll be at a Moonbase Market.
Yeah, it's going to be fun. And then our plan for next month's talk is going to be, we're going to look at the talks at PixelPop and find some of the ones that we think will resonate with the community and have them come and do the talk next month. We've done it in the past. PixelPop is a hard thing to see all the talks and play all the games you want. So like doing that, there'll be probably at least one of those talks will be one that you missed. So come back, and if you can't make it to PixelPop, definitely for sure come out. So, and then we also have something big planned for the end of August, and we're not going to announce it today. We'll talk about it at PixelPop though. Oh yeah, when is that? Oh yeah, Wings.
The 19th.
Yeah. So if you haven't heard of Wings, do you want to?
Sure. Wings is the women in games. Sorry, it's tripping over my tongue. Women in Games meetup, which is when was it again?
I think it's Thursday the 19th, but I'm not sure.
Yeah. So check out stlgamedev.com/wings for details for that one.
It is only for women and underrepresented genders. And the location is private. So if you want to go and you are one of those things, then get on the meetup site, look it up, reach out and find the location, and then go and hang out. So, yeah.
Awesome. Thanks for coming out. Thank you, Riot, again for hosting us.
Thank you, Rob, for talking.
Yeah. Thank you, Wes, for talking.
And hang out and talk if you want for a little bit, and have a good night.